There's always going to be change, right? And I think along with change comes uncertainty and anxiety. But in the workforce today, you have to be able to be malleable, adaptable, and pliable to change without having the negative consequence of change, and leaning into what's the opportunity with change, right? What's the resiliency of being able to embrace the past that got you to where you are in the present, while still being malleable enough to embrace the needs of the future in order to keep your sustainability and keep you going forward. How do you internalize change, right? Or how do you internalize disappointment?
As you know, we use this platform to share stories of resilience. And today I have a very special guest. Hey everybody, it's your host from the Sally Allen podcast. Here we go again, another episode. And I am thrilled today because I have one of my most favorite people on the podcast. It's Dr. Bo, and I've been saying his name wrong for 10 years now. Abiodun.
That's it.
Abiodun. I can't believe I was saying Abiodun for 10 years and you never corrected me. He never corrected me. So I have to tell you about this incredible human being. He has been my rock in the corporate world. He just is a wealth of knowledge. I mean, I don't think there's any questions that you can't answer. He just knows everything in a good way. So I want to welcome him on the podcast. Dr. Bo, welcome to the Sally Allen podcast.
Hey, thank you. That was a very nice, very generous compliment.
You're like, why are you buttering me up?
Yeah. I might have an answer. Doesn't mean it's right, you know.
Well, look, he's the person. If I'm panicking with something, I go to Bo. He has the answer to. I'm telling you. But welcome. You know, I've been wanting you to be on this podcast to talk about resilience, and I don't know what we're going to talk about because I never script. I was come in and just say we're going to talk about whatever. So I realized as I was thinking about this and thinking about you, I only know about your corporate life.
Okay.
I don't know much about your personal life, your personal resiliency. Yeah. You were in the military, but talk to me a little bit about that. You know, your personal life, resiliency in your personal life, and then how did that translate to the corporate life?
Yeah, hopefully I'll keep it as brief as possible. But I think you know more than what you think. We've had conversations here and there over the years. But I come from a family of immigrants. Both my parents are Nigerian. They came here in the '60s. Both were educated. You can imagine someone of my pigmentation coming here in the '60s with education, thinking that that the world is your oyster in America, and say, hey, you can be anything you want to be, and then then that turns into no, you can't. You can go do blue collar, but you can't go do that.
You can't do that. Yeah.
So my dad, my dad's probably my hero. We talk about people, and so I would say people, modestly, people will say to me from time to time, hey, Bo, you're pretty smart, or you seem pretty smart. And maybe I've tricked a few people, but one person that I do know is a genius is my dad. Like my dad still wows me with his intelligence, his brilliance. In his late 80s, he says stuff that I don't even know what he's saying. I don't know the words. His vocabulary is extensive, and people and I'm a doctor, a real doctor, right? And and he like floors me with some of his intelligence. So, but anyway, long story short, my parents were here in the '60s. You go through all that. You don't really know what let's just say some of those negatives are. Until when you're a kid, right? You just know, hey, your friends are your friends. You do what you do with your friends, and you just like you don't know what poverty is until somebody tells you different, right? So and you grow up, and then you start to do some things here and there. My dad had gotten hurt at work, and he still continued to kind of work through. He had a blue collar job. He got hurt at work, and then I had to try and help pick up some of the pieces just to kind of keep things, money coming in the door. I got me a little job at a younger age, so then I learned work ethic early.
Where did you work?
I worked at this Jewish company that was a hardware store, and basically think of like a True Value or Ace hardware store.
Okay.
And it was kind of like that before the big box, Home Depot, and Lowe's, And so I worked there, and it was on a kind of government-sponsored job program where basically they would take young people they were trying to teach, job skill, and then the company would basically get your labor, your work, and the government paid for it. So the city paid for it. So they paid for it for the summer, and through the summer, the company determine whether or not they want to keep you. They say, hey, you know what? Yeah. So then I worked there part-time while I was in high school, basically. So that was kind of my first job. And that was kind of like, I learned work ethic doing hard
See,
labor.
I didn't even know you did hard labor.
Hard labor, hard labor. And in the midst of that hard labor job, just circumstances presented itself, and I met a couple guys that were concert promoters. And then for a couple of years, I was doing this kind of like quasi concert promoting thing in the background. It was really cool back then.
Who knows this about you? I don't think anybody knows this about you.
Not as cool now. Now in the age of social media, influencers, and all these other things, you don't realize how much we were doing then. But long story short, it was some older gentlemen that were concert promoters, and they would do these things. And I'm talking concerts like the old school days of like NWA and Queen Latifah. Telling my age now, but it's okay. So I'm old. I'm leaning into the old now. So then, long story short, after that, I don't think this could be a short story now based on what I said. So at the end of the day, I learned a lot doing the concert promoting. And then it was one of those things where you're 18 and you're like, okay, well, what am I going to do next, right? And you say, I'll be a concert promoter forever. That's it. I'll be the next, whatever, And the gentleman I worked for, who was actually a police officer who had the concert promotion company on the side, he said, you're really bright, you're young. He said, don't go be like these other guys here. They're still here working for me, and go get your education, go get your degree. So for that, I'm going to fire you.
Oh.
And he fired me to force me to go to pursue
what an incredible
school and education. I don't know if it was incredible. The first time I thought he was still in my IP actually, because I gave a lot of great ideas. And some of those great ideas panned out into a lot more gate sales and stuff like that. But it was cool. I got to go to radio stations and be in limos with like famous people and go to concerts and be backstage at an early age, between 15 and 18. So I did that, and then 18 joined the military. Military teaches you a wealth about what we talked about with resilience. One of the sayings is in the military, I think, which is I always keep in my heart to this day, is you train harder than you fight. And so the military does that, right? And one of the things is, I'm not a warmonger or anything like that, but in the United States, one of the biggest things that we've always had was our training regiment. That whatever type of training, it teaches you what you need to do in a situation of adversity where you need resilience, and then you learn that when you actually have to do it, it's actually easier to do it than it was to do the training. And I think that's what made so many different types of industries or people successful. If you think of famous athletes or famous boxers or famous runners, they're all competing with themselves. And they train so hard to be the best version of them. And then when they get into the competition, it's not about the competition. It's about that they've trained to the best of their ability to beat themselves, and that's how they stay up front. And I think of things like that. And I hate to use sports analogies because people use those a lot.
No, it's great. Yeah. So tell me how you translate some of those skills from the military into the workplace.
Yeah. So at work, regardless of the vocation or the profession, there's always going to be change, right? And I think along with change comes uncertainty and anxiety. There also comes change management, and I think for the military, it's a transferable skill that you learn, this resilience thing. And in the workforce, you really have to be able, and it's more prevalent today than it ever was, in the past, because things move slower. But in the workforce today, you have to be able to be malleable, adaptable, and pliable to change without having the negative consequence of change, and leaning into what's the opportunity with change. Right. And I think all changes provide you a sense of opportunity, right? So that's really what it boils down to. If you go back to the days of, say, Blockbuster, right? I know some people say, I'm dating myself again, but Blockbuster Video, right? There was movement and momentum when it came to using technology and digital technology and DVDs or CDs or whatever they were.
The VHS tapes.
And all that, right? And they didn't want to change from a strategy standpoint. And then I could even think of other companies there when Netflix came in and said, and Blockbuster had a chance to basically own Netflix and own that market. And they rejected that. They rejected that. And in this digital age, there's a lot of change like that where you really got to understand, well, what's the resiliency of being able to embrace the past that got you to where you are in the present, while still being malleable enough to embrace the needs of the future in order to keep your sustainability and keep you going forward, consistent with the movement and the progress of the environment around you. And I think that's the part. And I know that sounds like a lot and a lot of, stuff, but the reality is resilience really boils down to how do you internalize change at the end of the day. And that is really what resilience is about, right? Or how do you internalize disappointment? right?
Yes.
And those are the kind of things that, you've heard other people say things like, well, it's not how many times you get knocked down, but it's how many times you get up, right?
Yeah. I think it also has to do with this forward thinking, that if you don't have this forward thinking, you get left behind.
Yeah.
Right? Like the
Yeah.
blockbusters, they got
Yeah.
left behind because they didn't have this forward thinking.
Right.
They couldn't visualize Netflix, like Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
He's a visionary.
Yeah.
And he visualizes stuff, but with Blockbuster, they couldn't visualize that Netflix.
And sometimes
Yeah.
the challenge is you can be held hostage by the success of your past.
Yes.
And what got you to where you are today may not be what will get you to where you want to go tomorrow.
That's a book.
And,
You know, that's the name of
and I think a couple people said that. I got these things I call Boisms. I probably got about 300 of them. My name's Bo, and these Boisms, right? And these are all these little colloquialisms I've either picked up from movies or I picked up from my own self. Or I've heard, smart people say, because I think we all encounter a lot of, words of wisdom. My dad always says wisdom has no home, right? A simple child can tell you some things that you'll say and it gives you some insight, right?
Right.
And I think that's the thing. So when you don't get, held hostage by the past, you're able to embrace the opportunities that the future has for you.
Yeah.
And that's really how you really can reframe what resiliency means.
Yeah,
Because the definition of resiliency sometimes in some people's head think is, it's toughing it out. It's just being, it's something you got to fight through, right? But sometimes it's something that you should lean into, right? It's like swimming with the current, rather than trying to fight against the current.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think sometimes we don't do that enough. We're always fighting against instead of embracing where we're at. And that comes back to changes in the workplace where it's so hard to embrace a change or embrace where we're going. People always fight against. And when you fight against the tide, you don't grow.
No, you fight against the tide, you don't grow. I always tell people, there's another saying that I say, another Boism. I always say, busy doesn't always mean benefit.
Right.
And that is one of my strong points, right? So, because you could be swimming upstream all day long, but the current's telling you, hey, if you actually run with the current, you actually can build momentum in the direction that you want to go to in the first place. So you always got to just make sure that you're not just being busy without benefit.
Right. So I want to ask you, one of the things I've noticed that you do really well, and you're very valued in the corporate world. There are many things, but the one thing is you're really good at putting out fires, mobilizing teams, like putting a tiger team together and really solve a problem.
Yeah.
Right? How do you do that?
I think the first thing is appreciating the fact that you have a lot of hardworking, let's just say, professionals that are all bringing a value and a talent.
Right.
And they're all with a similar desire to try to get to an outcome, a solution, overcome a challenge. And one of the first things you really want to do is really get them to embrace, well, how are we all going to agree to get there?
Right.
And then that's by understanding what the goal is, and then putting people in the position that they feel that they're contributing. Because remember, I said busy doesn't always mean benefit.
That's right. That's
right.
Yeah,
but it's the benefit when you need it. And I think one of the first like Tiger teams I got to participate in, within the industry I'm in today, it was a lot of smart people that knew more about the industry than me. I hadn't been in the industry but a few months. But the one thing I did know is I saw a lot of people pushing against each other.
Right.
And this goes to one of those Boisms. I always remember one of my favorite shows was The Wire. The Wire was on HBO, and in that show, there was this one scene where they were trying to move a desk out of a room. Okay, it was in a room. And then you've got like 3 or 4, sergeants or police officers or whatever, detectives on one side pulling. And then you got the other dudes, they say, hey, we're going to come help you. We're going to come help you. And then they get on the other side. So now the desk is really sitting between the threshold of being in and out.
Right.
And there's 6 of them now just wrestling with this desk. And this is old school steel desk stuff, right? The stuff that when you're young, not these little, IKEA desks.
Walnut,
these big
solid
desks, right?
wood.
And they're struggling with this desk. And remember what I said earlier about, you said, how do you get Tiger teams to get together? And they all have the same common goal. And they all have a talent that they're bringing. And they all have an energy they're bringing. But in that scene, what the biggest problem was, the goal wasn't clear. And when people needed to make their contribution and how they need to make their contribution wasn't clear. Guess what was happening? You had the group in the room trying to push the desk out, which was the original goal.
Right.
The group that was on the other side thinking they need help came, and they were trying to push it in the room. So you had 3 folks on each side, both pushing, and guess what happens when you have contrasting forces equally? You're going nowhere.
You're a standstill.
You're at a standstill.
That's interesting.
And so that scene is one of those, and that's what people always wonder, like, where do you get these little thoughts from? Some of these little things, it's so weird.
HBO.
I watch shows.
I got to go watch HBO.
I watch HBO. So, there's a lot of other things in The Wire, that may not be correct for TV and for the young folks, but there's a lot of things in there like that in life where you have common goals. but people don't really understand the effort and aligning that so that everyone is contributing the effort towards the goal and not contradicting each other.
Yeah, I like to
And I
say,
think I
yeah,
make that clarity, and I think I bring that
yeah,
clarity.
I like that clarity because what I was going to say is clear is kind.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we let people know exactly what they need to do and we set those goals, then for sure they can't fail.
Yeah. And then, you know, another thing I do to help with that is when you talk about trying to solve problems or executing is once you get the smart people and the experts understanding what the goal is, you provide them the support for all the hygiene of what needs to be done,
Yeah,
get out of the way.
right,
Get out of the
right.
way. And then
Yeah.
let them continue to perform. And then when you could see things, you know, a step back in the distance a little bit, you could see where some instances where, hey, two people are both pushing against each other, and you can kind of provide kind of
Right.
that observation from kind of that bird's eye view, and then you just continue to do that hygiene along the way, and eventually, you know, you all achieve those outcomes. You know, some people
Yeah.
call it, pushing the needle or you know, the spaghetti on the table and trying to get, you know, whatever they call that. But it's not easy work, right?
Yeah.
Because if it was easy, guess what?
Yeah.
It would have already been
It
done.
would already been
It
done.
would have already been done.
Yes.
It would have already
Yeah.
been done.
But I see what you're saying, stepping out of the way means one, you're empowering them, but two, you're allowing them to think for themselves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
do some critical thinking.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, my coaching tells me people don't do enough critical thinking for themselves.
Yeah.
So stepping out of the way, I absolutely love that. So what's as you went to the military, you came out, now your career progression, what's the biggest hurdle or challenge you've experienced in your career progression?
Yeah, probably one of the biggest challenges is continuing to stay motivated, right? Because when you do something well and you know you get a lot of accolades for it and you've seen a lot of success, sometimes you want to try and you almost have to define yourself new challenges to keep yourself kind of engaged. And that's for me personally.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that applies to everyone, but for me, it's just continuing to find ways to stimulate yourself to be engaged in the activities. And then the other part, which is the opposite contrast, is when you do something too well, you can make it look too easy.
Right.
And people take
right.
that for granted. And that's a struggle in itself.
Yeah, you gotta keep raising the bar. Like, okay.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
And then and this might be a little bit too kind of inward focused, but you also have to think about when you do some things well, how do you help to not create this codependency, like you mentioned earlier, that folks are in a position that you allow them, that they're able to further grow their skill and grow their ability to be less codependent, and then you create other replications of people who could probably solve similar problems, similar challenges, and do things like that. So, and so just finding that balance between how much engagement is not enough and how much engagement is too much. And finding that balance is just something that you have to continuously, throttle, modulate as you go along, because each challenge, each opportunity brings a different level of engagement that's needed. And if you do too much engagement, sometimes you could probably be a little bit too overbearing in the situation. If you don't have enough engagement, the outcome you wanted to intend to get may have some challenges getting there. And I think that's just something that you have to balance out. So
yeah.
So
what is your proudest moment in your career?
Oh, my proudest moment. My career. I don't know. That's a tough one.
It's tough because you don't like to talk about it.
Yeah, I don't like to talk about me. Yeah, this is believe it or not, this is an awkward space for me. It might seem like this is where I like to be, but
I get this from a lot of executives too.
Yeah. I think what some of the proudest moments for me have been, and it's a reputation I kind of gathered along the way, not deliberately, but a lot of people who've worked for me have gone on to move on to higher level positions and positions that are higher than even the position I sit in today. And they've been looked at as top talents. And, little jokes here and there about, Bo's like the HR factory for good talent. Those I think have been those proudest moments for me. Because some of those people still like reach out to me in the background, just looking for some, insights. I don't have no wisdom to give them. It might be just one thing to kind of reinforce what they already knew in that decision point of where they're at in their career. But the ability to know that people that I believed in, I gave them an opportunity to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
They took that opportunity and they achieved that. I take no credit for their outcome because they were put in a position to succeed and they thrived in that position, and then they've moved on to new roles, and now they bring kind of a reputation of, being able to create organizations themselves. So I think those are my proudest moments when it comes to that.
Yeah, I think you're shorting yourself from some credit here, because I see one of the things you're really good at doing is getting people to think, when I come to you with things, I say poke holes in this.
Yeah.
Right, I'll tell you poke holes in it, but you always bring a different perspective
Yeah.
of things, and it's really good. Like things I wouldn't have thought about.
Yeah.
You would bring a different perspective to it.
Yeah.
So when you say you don't give them anything, I don't agree with that. Your perspective that you bring to the table is very valuable.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, sometimes you want a mirror to look in to kind of, just get an understanding. And I think sometimes I am kind of giving them that reflective mirror to basically bounce some of those thoughts off. And and sometimes I make some probably a little bit more contribution than maybe I've said. But it's always been a great thing. Now you say that's proudest moments. Now, but one of the more interesting moments is I've participated in company strategies before throughout my career. But in the later stages of my career, I had the opportunity to participate in one all the way from the inception, all the way to seeing the roadmap, and actually was inside the nuts and bolts of that. So that was rather cool to be in a multi-billion-dollar company, seeing how we derived a strategy, and then seeing those things play out. And then you've seen double-digit shareholder growth, stock price growth, and you're like, hey, that thing
I'm
actually
part of
something.
this.
I was a part of this thing. So I think those are those other little nuggets of things. But those are those what would you say, inanimate things that really don't mean anything, because nobody will ever remember how much you participated with the NFL. Nobody will care about what the share price was before and then. But the people you touch, those are the things that I think I cherish and value the most, because again, those people become phenomenal leaders on their own right, and I know I made some small contribution to that, and then I'm still friends with them to this day. They invite me over for the kids' birthdays. Because I don't have no little ones anymore. Mine's full grown. So I go to these little birthdays. I got these little kids, and I knew them when they were either not born or infants, and to see them and their parents thriving is something that really gives me some excitement.
I just love that. I think if you put that in one sentence, MC Felt says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
How do you put that? Did I say that correctly?
That's it.
Yeah. And I think that's like everything you just said. Just go into that one little, that one little sentence. So I have a question for you.
Yes.
I'm struggling with something with a client. There's an employee who needs hand-holding all the way, every single time on a project. What advice would you give? How would you handle that?
I think the first thing you mentioned the hand holding as if it's something negative. So at least that's how it sounds. So the first thing I would try to understand is what is the challenges in either that person's confidence to be independent, and try to dig into that, because that's probably the root cause of some of that curiosity you may have of this hand holding. So without having all the in-depth understanding of that client, I would really try and help them, and then I would try to help them to reinforce that these things that you're experiencing in this example or this situation or this activity, it's just a different version of the same thing. Because sometimes we feel like we're experiencing something completely different, but all we're doing is experiencing the same thing, just at a different time.
Yeah.
And sometimes people can lose some of their confidence or their own internal confidence with that, and then they build that confidence from external needs, whether it's people that they support, and you want to help to build up their own internal confidence, and you try to understand what's the blockage between them and having that internal fortitude.
Right.
That's at least that's my short answer. I don't know if that's the right answer, but you did say I'll always have an answer, so that would be my answer.
Yes. So let me ask. So is there anything that you wanted to share that I haven't asked you?
No. But I do have a question for you. I talked a little bit about trying to find that balance as a leader. And you've asked me some great questions here, and you've given me kind of an opportunity to kind of share a little bit of my story. And we've got a long friendship that goes way back, and it's been something I've benefited from. I want to say thank you for that. And I wanted to ask you one more question and probably get some benefit. If you're a leader and you're dealing with change, we talked about resilience, and we talked about that a little bit. How would you deal with a client or a situation where the person knows that they're pretty successful and there's change that's happening around them, and they may have a sense that the organization may not necessarily value their contribution as much anymore because it's now kind of taken for granted? So how would you talk to a leader about something like that?
Okay, so one of the reasons I would say, why do you think the organization is not valuing the person? What's making them feel that the organization is not valuing them?
Yeah.
Right? Is it a valid feeling?
Yeah.
Right? And there are circumstances that you would ask. And I would ask my client to give me some examples. Give me some examples.
Yeah.
And if those examples are valid, that, okay, there have been some structure change, there have been some organizational change, and you feel like your role has been demoted a little bit,
Okay.
I would say perhaps one, it's time to talk to management And perhaps two, it's time to move on.
Okay.
Because you have outgrown the business or the business have outgrown you.
Yeah. But definitely there's probably an alignment
There's
change.
a misalignment.
There's a misalignment
There's a
there.
misalignment.
Yeah, see,
yeah.
that's why you're good at what you do. You can answer these questions
you,
and provide some
Dr.
insight.
Bell.
I'll definitely be able to have that insight, share that with folks in my organization, because we all have talent in our organization that we value. But as the business evolves, there come situations where maybe that alignment isn't the same or as precise as it was before.
Yeah, and I add this to it that people don't realize. There is also the other thing that's happening to anybody going through that. The longer you don't take care of it, it's like this big, I call it weed that grows mentally.
Yeah.
It's a weed that continues to grow, and it really affects you mentally, and it takes up that mental space to a point where you don't function as 100% capacity because half of your brain, right?
Yeah.
Your brain, this is your brain, half of it here you're working, and the other half is headspace that's taken up by that situation.
Yeah.
So you
that's a good point. Yeah.
Give the whole.
Yeah, you can't be the best version of yourself.
You cannot be the best version of yourself.
Because it tends to be a distraction at some point, really is what you're saying, right?
Right. And it
that takes
continues to
capacity.
fester in the background,
Yeah.
right? It continues to fester unless it's dealt with.
Okay. All right.
Good. So do you have any takeaway for our audience today? Thanks for that question, by the way.
No. I think the one takeaway, I would share is, leadership is, an ongoing thing. It's not a destination. When you think about resilience, resilience is really just trying to understand change and how do you internalize change, right? Because, there's always going to be some form of change. And then the ability to look at that change as opportunity and then finding where is that opportunity within that change. And I think those are things that turn, unknown outcomes into successful outcomes. Because every change has an unknown entity or element to it, right?
Right.
Positive or negative, potentially. And you're trying to find the positive in each of those elements. So that's what I would leave with folks. So.
Yeah, I love that, Dr. Bo. Thank you so much for sharing that wisdom with us and being open and frank and honest.
Yeah.
I do agree with you on the changes. I feel that if we're fighting against the tide, especially right now with companies, there's a lot of changes going on. If we're fighting against the tide, then we're really not going anywhere. But embracing the change and seeing where the flow goes will help with growth and development. And with that, friends, today it's a wrap.